People, the time has finally come. If you have or know anything about the CRF450RL, then you will definitely want to hear about this. You can now get an ECU Reflash. Needless to say, I'm really excited to try this thing out, and not just try it out, but to stack it up head to head against the stock ECU and my Vortex ECU to see how this stands up. This is a reflashed ECU from 550 Performance. 550 Performance is basically a small mom and pop shop that specializes in dual sport and light ADV tuning and performance parts. But don't let the small shop size fool you, they know what they're doing. They provide similar reflashes for the CRF450L and 300L lines with many happy customers, and not to mention the fact that the owner of 550 Performance has a background in OEM software development, so I think he knows what he's doing. In fact, if you check out Thumper Talk right now, you'll see that there was a recent thread created about this very reflash in which the man himself jumped in and provided a lot of information. And I mean a lot, like charts and graphs a lot, using words that if I was listening to this, I would just nod along to pretend like I know what he's talking about, but honestly, that hamster wheel ain't spinning. Needless to say, they did the homework. There's a reason why it took so long for someone to finally offer a reflash for this bike. And now it's finally available and in my hands. And I have to give a huge shout out to Maverick at 550 Performance. He's the owner there, for allowing me the privilege of trying this thing out. I actually reached out to him on that very TT thread so that we can make this thing happen. I'm genuinely really excited to see what this thing has in store for me, because with this bike, I have been wanting a reflash for years now. OG channel viewers may know that I always prefer a reflash over any kind of aftermarket ECU or piggyback system. They're cheaper, they're less complicated, and they utilize OEM parts. Like the Grom here, when I wanted to get some performance out of it, instead of going to something like A-Racer or DynoJet or Bazzaz tuning, I decided to get a Stage 2 reflash from DHM. And when I had the Benelli at the very start of this channel, I did the exact same. So as much as I like to tout testing and reviewing and some development on this bike on this channel, although that development doesn't go any farther than cutting plastic, I'm not a tuner by any means. I don't have the knowledge or the know-how to make those kind of decisions. I much rather put it in the hands of professionals that know what they're doing to rewrite the software or whatever it is that they do to make the bike happy, and thus make me happy. But getting back to this particular reflash, when you go onto their website to order one of these things, you gotta let them know which model year you have, what exhaust you have, and what air filter you run. And with this reflash, there are 3 stages available: stock improved, stage 0.5, and stage 1.0. Basically, this all depends on what kind of exhaust system you're running on your bike. Stock improved, of course, is if you have something bone stock, like you just rolled it off the dealer floor. Stage 0.5 is if you have a slip-on exhaust, and then stage 1.0 is if you have the full exhaust. Now in my case, I have a bit of a unique situation because I have kind of a stock slip-on hybrid system going on here. It's stock, but it's not stock for this bike. Both the header and the muffler are from a CRF450X. So because of this, they recommended that I personally go with the stage 0.5 as if I had an FMF Q4 slip-on. Now all that being said, I really want to just chuck this thing in the bike and go for a rip, but first, I think it's best that we take a trip down memory lane.
That's right, to refamiliarize myself and, in a sense, relive the trauma, we're starting this party off with the stock ECU. And I'm talking just the stock ECU. No JD jetting, no other kind of fuel trims, just straight OE, baby. And just like I did in the last episode with the throttle cams, to eliminate any external factors, as you probably can see with that engine braking that I did just there, this is on a stock throttle cam. There is 0 throttle taming whatsoever. So that way, any impact that we have on that is from the ECU and the ECU alone. Pop, 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 pop. Wow, that is like aggressive D-cell pop. I'll do an idle check. You can tell it's a stock ECU from the sound alone. Just the tiniest bit sputtery. Oh look, someone took inspiration. Someone saw my Ruckus videos and clearly made a copy. Interesting. Another reason I can tell it's a stock ECU is because my leg is so warm and it's not even close to the chassis at all. You can definitely tell with those temperatures getting high. Seeing that good old 199 when I'm sitting at a stoplight. Actually, that brings up a good point because I'm relying on the 12 o'clock labs mini gauge here, but because I had the Vortex in here previously, I had to do a reflash of that, and I had to rewire a few things to make it work. But since then, I just took out the Vortex and put the stock one back in, and all the dials are working there. All the engine temperature, the air temperature, everything looks perfectly accurate. That's a cool bonus, I guess, in that I don't have to do anything for the wiring on that. I can swap ECUs day and night and no change. I will be curious to see how the reflash handles that, though. I imagine it'll be fine. I don't know if I'll be able to replicate this when I put the reflashed ECU in, but it'll be fun enough just to see how good or ungood the stock ECU, stock throttle is all about.
Or no, right hand on your thigh, clutch only.
Clutch only? Alright, not exactly what I was here to test, but whatever. That's on me for crashing this dude's party. Okay, maybe this is the ultimate test of how this tractor.
80% of the time, that clutch is in, no power. Just momentum. So, a little bit of power, clutch is in.
Now let's do some actual testing we can compare between all the ECUs. And just messing around with this one the other night, I think a good test would just be kind of a medium roll on, roll off here at like, you know, 6, 7, 8 miles an hour. It's just like on, off, on, off, on, off. Maybe we can also see what a tight little figure of 8 does with this thing. Well, that wasn't too bad, but that just goes to show that maybe the next ECU will be even better. So another test I want to do with all of these is a high-speed 90-degree where I'm not actually stopping, just to see how the transition is from brake to throttle. And you can see what I did just there. It was a little abrupt, and that might also honestly have to do with my riding performance. I'm not the best rider in the world, so I probably did just go full brake to full gas. But if we do it in the same manner with the Reflash ECU, maybe it'll actually cover my mistakes. Let's replicate a test that we did at the slow speed, but for medium speed, going in third gear, 30 miles an hour, thereabouts. And I just want to roll on smooth and roll off. I'm gonna do it one-handed, so that way, hopefully it kind of picks up a little bit more of what I'm feeling. And right now it's still very light switch. Ooh, also that, it's popping really badly every time I let off and then get back on. I guess we can like really just saw away at it. And I mean, that's the exaggerated version of what I just did there.
Well, I think that's enough familiarity, time to swap out ECUs and actually see what this thing has to offer. And another thing, I don't think I mentioned previously the cost of this. Assuming you give your core ECU to 550 Performance, this is going to cost you $200. $200 as opposed to something like the Vortex, which is the cheapest ECU option out there, which is like $700 to $800. So pretty cost effective if you ask me.
Here we go, here we go. First ride on the Reflash. Idle check. Right off the bat, a lot less stumbly as the stock ECU was. All right, since we just started, the bike is a little cold, so one of the things that I know with the stock ECU at least, it would pop so much on D-cell. So let's test it. Little bit. A few little pops and crackles there, but definitely a lot better than the stock ECU was.
Oh, just you wait, boy. Just you wait.
All right, let's get warmed up a little bit here with some figure 08s. And time for some slow speed roll on, roll off. So you can see the punch on roll on is still there, but the roll off is much more manageable. So the characteristic is still there. It's still got that dirt bike feel, but not so much that it's gonna throw you over the handlebars. All right, here we go. Off canter, 90 degree. Holy cow, now that was a backfire. So accounting for my personal skill set in that corner, it was much more manageable. Yes, there was a little bit of a transition, but all told, it was very manageable. I didn't have to feather the throttle as much as I did on the first try. All right, let's try some third gear roll on, roll off. See how that does. You see, again, it gives the punch when you hit the acceleration, but then when you let off, it's really smooth. So I'm getting thrown back, but I'm not getting thrown forward. Temperature check, 197, oh, 199, so it's exactly the same as the stock ECU. So it's interesting to see temperature-wise, it behaves exactly the same, or more or less like the stock ECU. It does take a little bit longer to get up to 199, which I do appreciate, but compare that to the Vortex, where that one, if it was sitting at the same red light in the heat, it would probably reach like 190 tops. I think the reason for the temperature difference there is with the Vortex ECU, it is using a lot more fuel, and you can hear it and you can see it with fuel ups. So taking all that into account, I'm really curious to see how the fuel mileage does with the Reflash, because if it's anything like the temperatures are with the stock ECU, hopefully it's on the same level with fuel economy. Well, before any final impressions, wow, we did compare it against the stock one, and it is a massive improvement, I will say that up front. But the question is, how does it stack up against its counterpart, the alternative, the aftermarket, the Vortex? All right, here we go. Slow roll on, slow roll off. So much like with the Reflash, the Vortex is much more manageable on roll off. But with the Vortex, I think in addition, it's almost got like a little bit of taming on the roll on. It's much more of a linear acceleration that rather than a punch to the gut. But the all-important roll off is not throwing me forward. All right, here we go. Off camber 90 degree. I think I would be willing to argue that that was smoother than the Reflash, and I wasn't scared out of my seat from the backfire. All right, third gear roll on. Again, it feels like the Vortex is actually giving me a little bit more of a mellow acceleration. Well, let me choose my words carefully. It is still accelerating just fine. It's got that, but it doesn't have the punch where you're being shifted back in your seat ever so slightly, like you would have gotten with the stock ECU and with the Reflash.
The time has finally come. Thoughts and feelings on the 550 Performance Reflash. I wanted to put this thing through its paces, and if my sore ass is any indication, I think I did just that. I ran the bike for over 400 miles, 5 fuel ups, and through every stretch of road I could find. Speaking of fuel ups, I mentioned earlier that the Vortex is pretty thirsty compared to the stock ECU, which was evident in my first fill up having swapped back.
Wow. 55. Forgot what it was like for this thing to get over 50 miles per gallon. But now we must see what the Reflash gives us. Ouch. 42 miles to the gallon. So this is more on par with the Vortex, clearly, than it was with the stock ECU.
So while the engine temperature does align with the stock ECU, unfortunately it doesn't when it comes to fuel economy. So if I take a look at every single fill up that I've ever had with this bike and then average it, stock versus Vortex versus Reflash, you can see that the Vortex gets about 4.12 miles per gallon less, and then the Reflash shockingly gets almost 6 miles per gallon less. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just that I've only done a few fill ups and so I need a little bit more to get a more accurate average, or maybe I've just developed a lead wrist in the last couple of weeks, but that's definitely something I want to keep an eye on in the future. But now we have to address that trumpeting of an elephant in the room, that massive backfire. Whether it was warm or cold, whether it was high RPM or low RPM, every time I let off the throttle and coasted towards a red light, it was here, there, everywhere.
Not sure how I feel being on a bike with a built-in jump scare.
I guess if I want to stay optimistic, I would probably say that maybe it has to do with me and my exhaust, because as I mentioned earlier, this is reflashed assuming I have an FMF Q4, which clearly I don't. Maybe there is enough of a difference between the Q4 and the stock 450X exhaust that maybe it is still too restrictive, and maybe the Reflash is just not taking that into account.
I'll immediately scratch that because, as you can hear, or not hear, that backfire problem, 100% solved. So because I want to put as many miles as I possibly can on this Reflash to give it a proper shakedown and a proper first impression, I figured it'd probably be best to actually just reach out to 550 Performance and tell them, hey, I'm having this huge backfire issue. What could possibly be the cause? So Maverick at 550 Performance immediately got back to me and said, I know exactly what the problem is. It could be one of two things. Number one, it could be an exhaust leak, meaning that there's air getting into the system from either the attachment points at the header or between the header and the muffler, or the second, which was my case, is that the pair system was completely intact. It was still on the bike. The pair valve is a part of the emission system, and what that does is it has a little reed valve basically, and it allows some kind of air to go into the exhaust system, which normally works really well for a stock exhaust, but then after you open things up, and even with the stock 450X exhaust, that's enough to open it up where you're putting too much air into the system and then it starts to combust, and that's where you get the D-cell pops and the backfires. So all I did was add a block-off plate, which 550 Performance also was kind enough to provide me, and I removed that entire valve system altogether. So now, as I'll demonstrate once again, when I let off and just coast on the engine braking Absolutely nothing, let alone no backfire, but not even decel pops.
Okay, taking all of that into account, final impressions. And honestly, this is the best bang for buck you could possibly find. It is a quarter of the price or less than any aftermarket ECU that solves the exact same problem. So honestly, why wouldn't you get this? I guess a few reasons against that I can think of are things like if you actually do want to tune the bike yourself, or you want to account for some future modifications that you haven't done yet. Vortex does do a good job of allowing the ability to easily switch between maps if you, for example, add an exhaust or something like that and not have to deal with having to send out the ECU to get it reflashed. And another would definitely be the fuel economy. I was not thrilled about that at all, but I guess you gotta have some compromise somewhere. But overall, it is a win-win. Perfect set it and forget it approach. I even like some of the characteristics that this provides over the Vortex, where the fuel cutoff is solved, but it still keeps it snappy. I never thought I would ever say this, but comparatively, the Vortex actually feels a bit subdued. My thanks again to 550 Performance. You make one hell of a software thing. Is it obvious I know nothing about tuning?
Reflash. Reflash. This is the background music for the Reflash video. Is this better than the stock ECU? Is this better than a Vortex? We're gonna find out.